The cool side of the pillow was a fleeting comfort. I'd finally drifted off, a blessed oblivion after a long day wrestling with code. My nightly routine was sacred: a cup of chamomile tea, a chapter of a good book, and then the sweet embrace of sleep. It was a Tuesday night, or rather, it was a Tuesday night until the jarring cacophony ripped me from my slumber. Bang, bang, bang. It sounded like someone was trying to break down my front door. My heart hammered against my ribs, adrenaline surging through me. Who in the world will be doing this at 3 in the morning? I cautiously crept out of bed, grabbing the baseball bat I kept tucked under the mattress, a sad necessity, given the increasing unease in the neighborhood lately. Peeking through the peephole, I saw her. Karen Johnson, my next-door neighbor, a woman whose name had become synonymous with entitlement and thinly veiled prejudice in our little cul-de-sac. She was wielding a pot and a pan like some deranged percussionist, her face contorted in a mask of fury. Even through the thick wood of the door, I could practically feel the venom radiating off her. This couldn't be good. With a sigh, I unbolted the door and cautiously opened it a crack. "Karen, what in the world?" I started, but she cut me off with a shriek. You need to fix my Wi-Fi now. It's been down all evening, and I can't stream my shows. It's your fault somehow. I just know it is." Her voice was a shrill weapon, laced with accusation and something else, something that made my stomach churn. It was the same tone she used when she suspected my music was too loud or when my friends visited, a tone that dripped with suspicion and territoriality. Then came the slurs. Words I hadn't heard directed at me since I was a child, hurled with the casual cruelty of someone who considered them perfectly acceptable. Each word felt like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole my breath. I stood there, momentarily stunned, as she ranted about lazy minorities and ruining the neighborhood, somehow connecting my existence to her non-existent internet connection. The audacity, the sheer unadulterated gall of this woman, was breathtaking. I clenched my fist, fighting back the urge to respond in kind. I knew that any reaction, even a justified one, would only be twisted and weaponized against me. The sheer irrational venom spewing from Karen's mouth was almost comical if it wasn't so deeply offensive. I stood there, blinking in the dim porch light, trying to process the sheer absurdity of the situation. This woman was standing on my doorstep at 3 a.m., screaming racist epithets and demanding I fix her Wi-Fi, as if I were some kind of on-call tech support solely dedicated to her beck and call. The worst part was the chilling realization that this wasn't just about the Wi-Fi. This was about power, about control, about her perceived right to dictate how I lived my life, all fueled by a hateful prejudice I'd hoped I'd left behind. My jaw tightened. "Karen," I said, struggling to keep my voice calm and even, "it's 3 in the morning. I have no idea why your Wi-Fi is down, and frankly, I don't care. I'm going back to bed." I took a step back, intending to close the door, but she lunged forward, planting her foot in the doorway. "Oh, no you don't. You're not getting away with this. I know you're doing this on purpose. You're probably hacking into my router right now. Fix it, or I'm calling the police." Her face was red and contorted, spittle flying from her mouth as she shrieked. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Calling the police, it was always the go-to move for people like her. The implicit understanding that her word, her perception, would carry more weight than mine, simply because of the color of our skin. I knew how these situations could escalate, how quickly a misunderstanding could turn into something far more dangerous, especially with someone like Karen at the helm. "Karen, you're being ridiculous," I said, my voice finally hardening. "This is harassment. I haven't done anything to your Wi-Fi. Now get off my property before I call the police myself." I tried to push the door closed, but she braced herself against it, her eyes blazing with manic energy. "Go ahead. Call them. I'll tell them what you're really doing, what you're really like. You're nothing but a—" I didn't let her finish. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, I slammed the door shut, ignoring her enraged screams and the renewed banging on the door. The wood shuddered under the force of her blows, but the deadbolt held. I leaned against the door, my heart pounding, my mind racing. This was escalating way too fast. I stood there, adrenaline coursing through my veins, listening to Karen's increasingly frantic and enraged screams echoing through the door. The thought of her calling the police sent a shiver of dread down my spine. I knew the narrative she would spin, the subtle implications and outright lies she would weave to paint me as the aggressor, the threat, the reason for her distress. It was a well-worn script, one that had been played out countless times before, and the ending was rarely in favor of someone who looked like me. I had a choice to make. I could call the police myself, try to preempt her version of the story, but that felt like playing into her hand, giving her the attention and validation she so desperately craved. Or I could stay put, hope she eventually gave up, and deal with the aftermath later. Neither option felt particularly appealing. Taking a deep breath, I decided on a course of action. I went to my bedroom, grabbed my phone, and started recording. If the police did arrive, I wanted to have a record of what was happening, a counter-narrative to her inevitable fabrications. Then I called my friend, David. David was a lawyer, and he knew the neighborhood, knew the history of racial tension that simmered beneath the surface. "David, I'm sorry to wake you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "but I need your help. Karen Johnson is outside my door, screaming and making threats. She's threatening to call the police, and I'm worried about what she'll say." David was instantly alert. "What's going on, Tim? Is she physically threatening you?" I explained the situation, omitting nothing from the Wi-Fi demand to the racist slurs. David listened intently, interrupting only to ask clarifying questions. When I finished, he sighed heavily. "Okay, Tim, here's what you need to do. Stay inside, don't engage with her. Continue recording everything. If the police arrive, be polite, be respectful, but don't say anything without me on the phone. I'm going to get dressed and head over there now." His calm, measured voice was a lifeline in the chaos. Knowing that I wasn't alone, that someone was coming to help, eased some of the panic that was threatening to overwhelm me. I thanked him profusely and ended the call. As I stood there, listening to Karen's continued tirade, the distant wail of sirens cut through the night. They were coming. The sirens grew louder, the pulsing red and blue lights painting distorted patterns on my living room walls. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. This was it, the moment of truth. My heart was racing, my palms were sweating, and I fought to keep my breathing steady. I glanced at my phone, confirming that the recording was still running. Every insult, every threat, every accusation was being captured, a digital shield against the lies I knew were about to be unleashed. The police car screeched to a halt in front of my house. 2 officers emerged, their faces grim and professional. One was a young woman, barely out of her 20s, the other a middle-aged man with a weary expression. I could practically smell the skepticism radiating off them. They'd probably dealt with countless neighborhood disputes, many of them fueled by petty grievances and inflated egos. But this was different. This wasn't just a squabble over a misplaced garbage can or a barking dog. This was race, prejudice, and the potential for catastrophic misunderstanding all rolled into one terrifying package. I watched as they approached Karen, who was standing triumphantly on my lawn, arms crossed, a smug look on her face. I could hear snippets of their conversation, even through the closed door. Harassing me, threatening me, wouldn't fix my Wi-Fi. She whined, her voice dripping with manufactured innocence. I gritted my teeth. The performance had begun. The female officer approached my door and knocked firmly. "Mr. Jones, we need to speak with you." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation. I opened the door, holding my hands up in a gesture of peace. "Officers," I said calmly, "thank you for responding. I understand there's been a complaint, but I assure you there's been a misunderstanding. Ma'am claims you've been harassing her and refusing to help her with her internet connection," the male officer said, his voice neutral but firm. "Can you tell us your side of the story?" I launched into my explanation, carefully recounting the events of the past hour, from the initial banging on the door to Karen's racist tirade. I made sure to emphasize that I had not threatened her in any way and that her accusations were completely baseless. As I spoke, I saw the officers exchange glances. The female officer's expression seemed to soften slightly, while the male officer remained impassive. I knew I had to be careful, choose my words wisely, and avoid any appearance of aggression or defensiveness. My life, my freedom, could depend on it. I finished my explanation, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The officers stood in silence for a moment, absorbing what I had said. The female officer broke the silence. "Mr. Jones, do you have any proof to support your claims?" she asked, her voice still neutral, but with a hint of genuine inquiry. "Yes, ma'am," I replied, grateful for the opportunity to corroborate my story. "I have a recording of Ms. Johnson's behavior from earlier this evening." It captures her threats and the language she used. I pulled out my phone and played the recording for them. The audio was clear and damning. Karen's ranting, her slurs, her demands, all laid bare for the officers to hear. As the recording played, I watched their faces. The female officer's eyes widened in disbelief, while the male officer's jaw tightened in anger. When the recording ended, the female officer turned to her partner. "I think we need to have a chat with Ms. Johnson," she said, her voice laced with steel. The two officers approached Karen, who was now looking visibly nervous. I watched as they spoke to her, their voices low and serious. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see Karen's face contorting in a mixture of anger and fear. She began to gesture wildly, her voice rising in pitch as she tried to defend herself. The officers listened patiently, but their expressions remained unchanged. After a few minutes, the female officer spoke into her radio, requesting backup. A few minutes later, another police car arrived, sirens blaring. The situation had escalated. I stood on my doorstep, watching as the officers placed Karen in handcuffs. She screamed and protested, claiming that she was being unfairly targeted, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. As they led her to the police car, she turned to me, her eyes filled with venom. "You haven't heard the last of this, Tim Jones," she shrieked. "I'll make you pay for this." I simply shook my head and closed the door. The relief that washed over me was immense, but it was tinged with a lingering unease. I knew that this wasn't over, that Karen's hatred would continue to fester, and that I would have to remain vigilant. The flashing lights of the police cars faded into the distance, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. I closed the door, sliding the deadbolt home with a resounding click. The adrenaline was slowly wearing off, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. I leaned against the door, taking deep breaths, trying to process everything that had just happened. David arrived a few minutes later, his face etched with concern. "Tim, are you okay?" "What happened?" he asked, his voice filled with worry. I recounted the events of the past hour, from Karen's initial outburst to her arrest. David listened intently, his expression growing increasingly grim. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that, Tim," he said, shaking his head. "This kind of thing is just unbelievable. But you handled it perfectly." The recording was a stroke of genius. We talked for a while longer, discussing the legal ramifications of Karen's actions and what I could expect in the coming days. David assured me that he would be there to support me every step of the way. Life slowly returned to normal, but the scars of that night remained. I was more cautious, more guarded, more aware of the subtle prejudices that still permeated my community. But I was also more determined than ever to fight for justice and equality, to create a world where no one would have to endure the kind of hatred and discrimination that I had experienced. The Wi-Fi, ironically, never worked properly for her again, a small, almost poetic justice in a situation that was anything but.